welcome, Joe.
Thank you.
Honored and excited to have you. So you are the co-founder of Ethereum?
A co-founder of Ethereum, yes.
Ethereum with Vitalik and others, and also the founder of ConsenSys. Yeah. So we're in New York. This is a sophisticated but broad New York startup tech crowd. And I think the people that are deep into crypto and blockchain know ConsenSys, but like for others, I think people may or may not have realized that this new juggernaut that appeared, software company in New York, in Brooklyn, that appeared sort of out of nowhere in the last couple of years. And the last number I saw, which were, I guess, back in February, was that you had 600 employees. So I'm sure you have more now. So tell us about what you guys have done.
Sure. So back it up a little bit to say 2012, where this thing, Bitcoin, had happened, and Bitcoin had brought a new kind of trust architecture to the world. Essentially, the Bitcoin invention was cryptocurrencies and blockchain and crypto economics. Crypto economics incentivized people to share their resources, to validate transactions, and secure a network, and that network could provide, in this case, a payment service or money, a store of value. In 2012, lots of different people around the world felt that this new trust architecture should probably be applied to virtually everything that we build in software, and a lot of different attempts were made, and Vitalik Buterin, the inventor of Ethereum, described the most scalable vision with respect to human action. So many different projects required protocol priests to get in at the protocol level and add a new opcode that would represent a new use case, and that wasn't a scalable approach to moving the world's systems onto more trustworthy infrastructure. Vitalik described a clear separation between the protocol and the application layer. It was obvious that we could build developer tools, libraries, etc., to enable all software engineers, millions of software engineers, to understand the programming model, because it would be very similar to building web pages or mobile apps, and identify their own problems and build their own solutions. And that's worked out reasonably well. We're still in very early days, and it's a very immature technology, immature ecosystem, but Ethereum does have hundreds of thousands of people who are during the day, paying all of their attention to Ethereum, making a living doing that sort of work. So 1 year into the Ethereum project, I started the company ConsenSys to basically build at the application layer. We intended to be a venture production studio. We ended up, because we were kind of first, we ended up having to be everything, so we're a very oddly shaped company. We do product, we do consulting work, we do education, we do capital markets activities. On the product side, we built developer tools, lots of infrastructure elements. We process about 10 billion queries per day from the public Ethereum ecosystem. We build core components like identity, like governance tools, accounting systems, etc. And lots of different projects. Some of them have spun out as different companies that are pursuing the hypothesis that the nature of the firm, the nature of how we deliver products and services to people and companies will change. We'll still have companies and the traditional model, but there is this new model. There's this way of organizing for collective action, network business models, protocol-based open platforms. You can glue a lot of different people in different roles together with a token, so we've got a lot of projects in different niches that are doing that. We do consulting, governments and central banks and big corporations, and lots of other activities.
All right, awesome, thank you. So I want to unpack some of this. Starting probably at a pretty high level. So this is a data science, machine learning crowd, and through speaking with people, I know that some people went down very far into the proverbial crypto rabbit hole and are experts. Others are still very new to this. So maybe taking it from the top. So you alluded to some of this, but obviously, I guess almost a year ago now, it was crypto mania, and the prices of cryptocurrencies kept climbing, and then the whole ICO thing got sort of crazy, and fast forward to today, we sort of more in a bear market. Some call it a crash. I guess the question is, beyond the ups and downs of individual cryptocurrencies, fundamentally taking a step back, why does all of this matter? Why do people here need to pay attention?
Lots of different reasons. So it's a new trust infrastructure. For millennia, we've been operating under Trust 1.0 or Trust 2.0. Trust 1.0 has monarchs at the top of a top-down command and control hierarchy. The monarchs and minions set the rules for the society, and minions enforce those rules. It gets a little better sometimes when you have an elected leader in that sort of architecture. Sometimes those systems work well, sometimes the implementations are capricious and they don't work so well for the people. So this new mechanism enables us to move from subjective manual trust mechanisms to automated trust and guaranteed execution of agreements. So whether those agreements are at a level between two people or companies, or whether they're written into the law, or whether they're treaties between companies, we have these mechanisms to guarantee execution. And that's going to take years, decades to really build out with respect to building social, economic, and political systems on all of that. A trust infrastructure enables people who want to transact with one another but don't know one another, or companies that compete with one another but want to collaborate also to share the same infrastructure. And because of the nature of the technology, we can be certain, or nearly certain, that even if up to half of the actors that are processing transactions on the system are malicious, the system still operates well and nobody's able to cheat. We think of some of our work as a natural evolution of the internet protocols, Web 1, Web 2. We're now just embarking on Web 3. Web 2 has been spectacularly transformative for the planet in great ways, and it's also, I think, outgrowing its ability to constrain us into treating each other well. And so we have, essentially the internet was built without a native money construct, so that's starting to happen. It was built without a native identity construct, so companies formed their own identity construct, and I spray my aspects of identity around the internet so that I can access free services. Those business models are really, I do like those companies, but those business models are a bit out of control, where we are the product, we are data is sourced on us so that we are a more expensive product that we can be sold, and mechanisms of addiction are being used so that we can be sold more often. And so,
just to anchor that into your comment about the nature of the firm, so what does a Facebook in a crypto world or in a blockchain world look like, a decentralized, and how do crypto economics actually work in that scenario?
So I'm not sure what a Facebook is going to look like. Yeah, so a network business model basically has lots of different actors and different roles, and ideally, if the systems, if the rules are built correctly, everybody's incentivized. It's basically a mechanism design. So you have a set of goals for your system. You have some smart people try to build rules and incentive mechanisms so that lots of different people in different roles and companies in different roles are incentivized to pursue their own selfish interest and by that action, the system goals are achieved. So we can imagine networks like one for an adjacent music industry. We've got a project called Ujo Music that's doing that. It's in beta. It's got hundreds of artists who have uploaded content. We have another project called Open Law that enables blockchain-based legally enforceable agreements. So you can use Open Law to set up usage agreements so that a consumer can download music, download stems, stream music. Another artist can do derivative works agreements, public performance, etc. And so those sort of multifaceted actors that are, they have roles in the existing music industry. They can have similar roles in an adjacent music industry. The one thing that's missing is that big intermediary in the middle that is sucking up 70% of the value in the ecosystem. So the record companies in the music industry, in the financial industry, big financial actors, and ride sharing, those big coordinating entities. So content creators, service providers, resource providers on these networks can much more directly access their consumers. And intermediation is a great thing in many circumstances. It reduces costs, it adds information, generally reduces friction. But in our frictional society, the spread between how much value is extracted and how much value is added tends to grow once you're an intermediary and you're imposed in the situation. And just to finish your previous question, we do lots of transactions in our society, and all those transactions currently involve some elements, some foundational elements of our society that are still realized in analog and frictional form. So whether it's identity or money or legally enforceable agreements or government certificates, we, at our company and in our ecosystem, we've realized all of these things in natively digital form. And so if you move the entire societal infrastructure in terms of all those fundamental elements into natively digital form, every transaction involving those elements can now clear and settle in the instant of the transaction. That's, I think, going to be a tremendous growth driver. Mm-hmm.
So you mentioned music and other things. I think the big question for a lot of people, actually, I was going to say outside of the crypto world, but also inside it, is where are the applications? Where are the dApps, the decentralized applications? Within the crypto world, I know you have this thing going on with Jimmy Song, who's I guess falls in the camp of Bitcoin maximalists. Where he thinks that the ultimate and one application of this whole thing is Bitcoin. And you have, I think, some bet going on or being determined where you take the opposite side, which is to say, well, there's going to be an application for just about everything. Where do you think we are, and what are the applications which are most likely to become a reality in the next 2 to 3 years?
Sure. So like the web, we started in sort of 95 with companies getting attracted to the technology but not comfortable with the scalability and the security and other elements of public internet. And so companies built intranets and explored the technology that way and got some value from that. And we moved to companies getting comfortable with the public internet and then comfortable with cloud. So we're seeing that happen right now. One prong of activity is bringing this technology to existing organizations and making things more efficient, making things more collaborative, enabling them to pursue different business models. And another is much more disruptive, where we really rethink how everything is going to be done. So there's lots of projects that we're involved in and others are involved in supply chain, for instance, or interbank payments and treasury management. And if you want to bring trust into supply chains, that has pretty profound implications. But so there's a huge amount of that activity going on. The really exciting stuff is essentially growing a new kind of economy. And there are thousands of projects going on that are implementing fungible token systems and non-fungible token systems and naming services and centralized exchanges and decentralized exchanges and parameterized insurance products, and I could go on for a pretty long time. And many of these elements are getting mature in their own right. Different atomic swap protocols are being applied and used by lots of people. It's not rampant across society. But as those things mature, as we build in new building blocks, then entrepreneurs can come along and put these systems together into much more sophisticated forms and capture consumers' imagination. So this year, we really need scalability worked out. We have the trust layer working pretty well, and we need at layer one, that trust layer, we need greater scalability, and that's going to happen over the next year or two. And layer two technologies are coming in.
Do you want to explain what that is, layer one and layer two?
Yeah, so essentially, web technologies have enabled us to do hundreds of thousands or millions of transactions per second for applications. Because we have this new trust architecture for IT systems, we've kind of thrown away all that scalability and replaced it with this system that can only do 20 transactions per second, but you can trust that system can't be cheated because it's radically decentralized. So now we need to, at this layer, at the layer one, we need to scale that significantly. And that's going to happen in sort of phase 3. But phase 2, which is upon us right now, is the use of off-chain technologies, things like state channels where you coordinate and then finalize effectively an infinite number of transactions, or side chains where you can stand up a blockchain system fit for purpose, whether it's for a game or a decentralized exchange, and you can link that into layer one so that any digitally valuable elements that are in the system can be pulled into Ethereum, into layer one. And so maybe it's a digital sword that you pull out of one game and you put into another, or you put that sword on an exchange or something like that. So there are lots of games that are on Ethereum right now, or that are coming out on Ethereum, that are essentially bringing their own scalability technologies. And there are a bunch of scalability technologies that are just more general that people are starting to use.
And going back to the intranet example, which maybe is a less exciting example, but that's sort of the enterprise use case, and a lot of people here work in sort of enterprise technology context. The counter argument that you hear some people say is, well, largely, a blockchain is just a very bad database, and that a lot of people, when they think they need a blockchain, in reality they need a better database. What are the criteria or the threshold, the number of participants, whatever it is, beyond which it becomes interesting to use a blockchain as opposed to a regular solution?
So it's use case dependent. There are two ways of thinking about it. One is from today's perspective, and one is 5 years from now or 10 years from now. From today's perspective, there are many situations where if you've got the standalone application, you probably just want to build on a centralized database. But if you have this view that this application maybe wants to make use of self-sovereign identity, which can only be done on the blockchain, or you may want to bring different counterparties from different organizations into this infrastructure, then it may make sense to start building for trustful collaboration. So even within a company, it may make sense to stand up a blockchain because a company is basically a microcosm of a society. You've got lots of different groups that are cooperative and competitive. They're all feeding from the same budget, and having transparency, having non-repudiability of what happened is even valuable in that context. So in that situation, a corrupt CFO, a rogue system administrator, a hacker can't get into the system and change historical data, unless they have control of more than half the system. And if you set things up well, then that should be very difficult to do.
Mm-hmm. So if we think of this as a sort of Web 3.0, if you go back to the previous I guess Web 2.0, you had the intersection of multiple trends, right, that created this whole thing. And, for Web 2.0, you had social, you had mobile, and you had cloud.
E-commerce.
E-commerce. And if you look at today, the emerging technologies that everybody seems to be excited about are, obviously crypto and blockchain, but also IoT and AI very much. Where do you see those trends interacting and mutually reinforcing each other? Maybe, starting with AI, crypto and AI?
Sure. So I think we're just on the precipice of being relevant to AI and IoT.
And I know that's your background, right? Like you started as
1,000 years ago, I did a lot of neural nets work. Yeah. So back to the transition from Web 2.0 to Web 3.0. Self-sovereign identity in the Web 3.0 world enables us to create and control the root of our identity on the blockchain. It enables us to have personal data lockers associated with that identity root, where we encrypt valuable data, health information, financial information, etc., and granularly control it from our side of the browser and selectively make it available to different actors that we designate. And so we move from a world in which there are a small number of state and commercial actors who have all the compute and all the data, which is really what you need in order to train up smart models, to a world in which the really valuable data, if we architect things well, is going to be encrypted and fully under our control. If I want to monetize that data, I can put it on a data market and do that. If I want to de-identify that data and lend it to a research study, I'll be able to do that. If I want to have that data for my use to maintain and optimize my health in a sort of longitudinal health application, I can do that. So data should serve me more than it serves Mark, essentially. Sorry, Mark. Facebook, Google, et cetera, they're still going to be able to pursue their business models. We're still going to spray the less valuable data throughout the internet, and they're still going to be able to monetize it, subject to some discussions that our society has to have in the face of GDPR and Cambridge Analytica. And so things may be dialed down a little bit, but the really valuable stuff is going to be under our control, I believe, and so it's going to be available for purchase by Facebook and Google, et cetera, but so many more different actors who, and essentially IoT systems will have secure enclaves where they'll be signing data and putting it out there. The value of having blockchain associated with my personal information is that I can, in a centralized database, control my own information, but I can't prove to the insurance company that it's real information or that it pertained to a certain time period in my life. And so if it's on the blockchain, sort of timestamp, provably if a medical institution or a doctor attests to the veracity of that data, then that's very valuable data that can be lent to a study or can get me health insurance, essentially.
And presumably you end up with also better AI, right? Because you're able to train your models on data.
Absolutely. Yeah, so much better information is available to a much broader audience. So there's still going to be a crazy arms race, but it's going to be far more actors in that race.
All right, and last question from me, because I want to save some time for people to ask questions. But I think what's something that's top of mind for a lot of people is also regulatory, the whole thing. So there were some very important announcements that were made by the SEC specifically for Ethereum. Do you want to? What's the current status?
Sure. So around the world, there's been a bunch of good news in certain jurisdictions and not so good news in other jurisdictions, which I think is not so good news for those jurisdictions, and maybe good news for the jurisdictions that are a little more pro this technology. Nobody at the SEC wants to kill blockchain for America. They also want to enforce the laws that they've been enforcing effectively for decades, protecting consumers. So they need to take a balanced approach. They need to message things positively, in my opinion. But there's also, I think, going to be even more of a reckoning coming where certain projects obviously sold securities and sold them contrary to securities laws.
And Jay Clayton made it clear that nobody was going to be grandfathered. Right?
Yeah, absolutely. So Jay Clayton said that. Bill Hinman, Director of Corporate Finance at the SEC, after they declared Bitcoin sufficiently decentralized so that it's not a security and put Ether in that category as well, the token on Ethereum, in that same set of remarks about Ether, he indicated that the SEC is very aware that there is a new model. So companies can, I can invest in a company and it can create value for consumers, and I can rely on that company for return on investment. That's a security. But there's a new way of organizing for collective action that has these people or companies in different roles that can deliver value in the form of services and products to some kind of consumer. And I may make a monetary purchase of a consumer utility token, but I'm also participating in creating the value of that network. So by my agency in that, I'm relying on myself and many others to create that value. And if there's a return on value because there's a lot of demand for that network and therefore demand for the token, then the token price is going to rise. And hopefully that's because we've all created a system that we are gaining value from. And so that is considered, you can architect that token properly, but if you market it incorrectly, that could be considered a security. If you market it in enormous quantities to speculator types and you give them big discounts, you put billboards in Times Square, leading people to believe that there is a group that they're relying on for return of investment, that's going to be considered a security. But if you don't do those things, if you essentially force people to understand what they're buying and force people to pledge or otherwise constrain them to actually use the token in the system, and you don't advertise to speculators, et cetera, then you have a clean consumer utility token.
Wonderful. All right. So as promised, I want to open up to questions. There's one here and then one here.
In your implementations with companies, have you ever come across a place where, let's say, there's a judicial litigation of a smart contract? The contract was coded based on what the developer coded, but the judge said, I need to order further discovery into the code's code, the smart contract's code. And did such a dispute ever happen? Because you mentioned that other than the publicly known stuff, you have done a lot of private stuff with companies as well. So just curious to know.
So it was hard for me to hear that. You're talking about discovery?
Has smart contracts stood the validity or in a judicial law offering using Ethereum?
Have I seen discovery with respect to blockchain systems?
So has smart contract stood up with any litigation with respect to any application which was developed on Ethereum-based platform using smart contracts, but there was some litigation which contested its validity.
Yep.
Okay, so I personally am not aware of data being presented from blockchain systems. I know there are people around the world that are working to, in different countries, that are working to enable that sort of data to be subject to legally enforceable agreements, et cetera. Our project Open Law enables legally enforceable hybrid agreements where you can have prose clauses and programmatic clauses, and you can escrow money into an agreement, you can send data into an agreement. The programmatic clause can act when certain conditions are met. You can put one of those things on the blockchain and have it completely visible and transparent, and the different counterparties can cryptographically sign that thing, and you can have different stages that it flows through. Or you can keep those agreements private and sign a digital digest of it, essentially a hash of that agreement, so that you're basically timestamping it and everybody's signing that sort of thing. So there are a few different projects other than that project out there. We're actually starting to use open law for NDAs and a handful of other activities, the Ujo Music project as well.
So maybe the...
Sure. I think he's got the mic. Yeah.
Thanks very much, Joe, for your insights. There's so much noise and hype in the crypto world these days. How do you find out what stuff has staying power, the protocols that you use, the systems you use, so you don't wake up one morning and say, hey, I just committed S.com?
I think it's a non-reducible computation. I think we have to live through it in order to see what's actually going to prevail. So we certainly have a pretty good view of the ecosystem, and it's just growing so fast. It is definitely really hard to keep up with what's going on. In terms of our ecosystem, it's really big and it's growing exponentially by any measure. And I'm talking about the Ethereum ecosystem. There's some great projects coming along that are trying to do roughly what Ethereum does. And I think they'll gain a few of them will gain some traction, but there's just, I think, several orders of magnitude at this point between Ethereum and, let's say, a project like Cardano or Archain or Dfinity or Zilliqa or others. And so at minimum, Ethereum's going to be important for quite a while. And we build a lot at the application layer of Ethereum. It is likely that many of those things will sit on multiple blockchains over time, and certainly multiple decentralized protocols, because we'll need protocols for decentralized storage and bandwidth and many other elements. So when you build an application, 90% of the work is working with customers, etc. So if you need to move it to multiple blockchain systems, that's not a big lift. I mean, it's a significant lift, but just acquiring customers and figuring out user experience, user interface, etc., is the much bigger lift.
Right here.
You mentioned what amount takes place on the blockchain overlaps. What's your view of the process in the U.S. to move this to Singapore and to Australia and other countries that have done a good job of consolidating digital identity, mostly having to services in light of the fact that most of our businesses and therefore the prospects of
Yeah, so Estonia has good government. They're maybe the only country in the world that wants more government. They want more software services delivered by government, because it's a pretty smooth, efficient infrastructure that serves the people reasonably well. They're starting to move a little bit to blockchain, but all of that is built in centralized infrastructure. I'm not privy to the probably thousands of different discussions in different agencies that are going on with respect to identity in the United States. We have conversations, but there's no real direct thrust to build a better identity system in the U.S. that I'm aware of. There are probably 1,000 direct thrusts, but I'm not involved in those conversations. And we have to ask whether that's what we want. So do we want the root of our identity to effectively be owned by the state? The thesis of Evernym and our project Uport, which works really closely with different decentralized identity groups, and there's a decentralized identity foundation that has put out a really great spec where you can establish your own identity on different protocols. It costs nothing to do that. You can set up essentially a very large number of those things. My preference is that we establish the root of our identity on blockchains and that different systems, state systems or corporate systems, all index into that. If we expose that as us as people, rather than a sort of pseudonym identity, which we can use for other purposes. And in that context, we own our root. Nobody can take that away from us. We can be forced out of our country with no possessions, and we can reestablish that in another country when we get back on our feet. Legacy identity providers like government agencies and banks, etc., they can attest that this root identity construct corresponds to me, tax-paying individual, etc. But they should just focus on their need, on their use case. And in many cases, very soon we're going to be able to have data that remains encrypted at all times, yet we'll still be able to ask questions of that encrypted data. And so we should move into a world where we don't have to share our address and everything a million times when we only need to do one small action with one company.
All right, let's do one last one.
Very nice talk presentation. I have a thought-provoking question about blockchain and AI, but I'm afraid to take too much time. Let me ask you an easy question. I realize I've heard you have a business incubator type of operation. So my question is, for you, the exit is more like sort of crowdfunding, like a more basic version of SAO, or they are alluding to more different kind of funding mechanism when they exit your incubator? And are you taking equity from them in any project?
Yeah, so we don't think about exit at all. We think about ecosystem building. We think about building a different kind of company or a mesh of different projects and companies. So the token launch mechanism is a way of just standing up a network business model. It could be considered a way of exiting, but we invest so that we pretty much never have to exit these different projects. And that's not 100% true. So there are many projects within ConsenSys, and ConsenSys is like a hybrid between a sort of more traditional software company and a VC, accelerator, incubator, etc. We are building an ecosystem. We do that by identifying projects that we want to see built, and we did that a lot early on, and we build them in endogenous development. Sometimes we have ideas and we hire people to execute those ideas. Sometimes people within the company, having built something, propose ideas, and we have a resource allocation circle process where lots of people hear the ideas and they allocate resources to projects that we like. We have lots of companies that come to us. Some of them are appropriate to bring fully in-house. And we have a venture arm where we've invested in about 30 projects, and we token launch external projects and sort of have some ownership in those. So with respect to equity, it ranges from sometimes a little more than 50% to 5% in an accelerator-like context.
Great. So I know you have a flight to catch to Asia tonight. So it's a wrap for tonight, but really appreciate it. This was fascinating. Thank you so much.
Thank you.